name is Christopher Powers with Oxbridge Quality Resources. I've been writing a lot about the CMMC program, and I think it's causing a little bit of confusion, so I want to try to make a quick video to try to condense some of the thoughts that I have on the program, why it's problematic, some of the things they can do to fix it, and hopefully the things that they can do soon to correct some of the mistakes they're making now. There's a lot of questions about CMMC, what it's going to entail, who it's going to impact, the costs, etc. And we're not getting clear answers yet from Department of Defense or the CMMC Accreditation Board. So let's kind of look at that. Let's see how the CMMC program came about. Let's look at some of the good things, but also then what were some of the mistakes that were made early on that led to the situation we're in now that's raising so many questions about conflicts of interest and possible problems with costs. First of all, let me clarify one point. I've been sort of branded as a critic of the CMMC program and the CMMC AB, and that's true to a certain extent. There are some issues that I have with it, but I wanted to clarify up front some of the things that I agree with and I think that we can all agree with. First of all, I think we can all agree that cybersecurity is an important issue that needs to be addressed. The country's cybersecurity footing, as I call it, is weak and it needs to be shored up. All smart, intelligent people, I think, can agree with this, that this is a problem that needs to be resolved. So that's the first point. The second point is that I actually like maturity models. There are people in this industry who disagree with me. They think a maturity model is the wrong way to go. I may eventually evolve into that point of view. Right now, as I speak today in 2020, I like maturity models. I think they're better than pass-fail ISO certifications, as they provide a way for a company to grow. It gives a better sense of where a company is at now versus where it might be at in the future. And I just like them better. And full disclosure, I've done work in the CMMI space on appraisal teams, so I am familiar with that scheme. The next thing is that I agree that the DoD needed to do something, and I think that the idea of applying a maturity model solution to the cybersecurity problem was the right thing to do. I think this was a good step. Again, other people will disagree and say this was the wrong step. Right where I am at right now, I really do think that that was the right step and they did the right thing. Things began to go wrong fairly early on, however. One of the things in the earliest days what the DoD did in order to dream up this scheme was they began conversations with the CMMI authors through the Software Enterprise Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, these are very, very smart people, and the CMMI scheme is generally pretty well respected. What the DoD decided to do is that they said, if we're going to come up with a maturity model solution for this cybersecurity problem, let's go to the maturity model experts at CMMI. And they did that. The problem that very quickly the DoD did, which was to attempt to merge together, to fuse together, the approach used by the CMMI Institute with ISO certifications. These two schemes are entirely different. They do not speak well with each other. They're entirely different operating systems, if you will, and they are extremely difficult to align. I know this because I worked on the original committee, one of the first meetings, where ISO was working to create a crosswalk document between ISO 9001 and the CMMI framework. And I left that committee early on because it was just a mess. It was a nightmare. And sure enough, the project took years and the output was largely garbage. But at least, they tried. But trying to translate ISO certification and accreditation into something that will match CMMI is like taking Greek, translating it into English, and then using the English to communicate with zebras. It just doesn't work, okay? The zebra's not going to know what you're talking about. And so that's what they tried to do, and that was a mistake from the beginning. It does appear that the Department of Defense office, the CMMC Project Management Office, led by Ellen Lord, didn't really understand these differences and was confused from the start, and to this day has never gotten clarity on this problem. And why is that a problem? The CMMI program does not call itself an accreditation program. CMMI audits are not audits. The auditors are not called auditors. Their certifications are not certifications. It is not a certification scheme. And as I said, the SEI folks and CMMI folks are very, very intelligent, and the wording they used is intentional. They don't even call it a standard, it's called a model. All of this language is very intentional to avoid comparisons with certification schemes. And so therefore, the CMMI scheme is not internationally accredited. It is recognized only on the branding power and the authority of Carnegie Mellon University and the SEI. Okay? Very similar to, let's say, the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval or the Michelin star ratings for restaurants. They're not internationally recognized except for the power that the brand brings to them and the respect that that brand generates. So CMMI is not an accredited certification program, but the DoD tried to create an accredited certification program by taking elements of the CMMI and then infusing them with the ISO accreditation scheme, and that's where things began to break down. So what happened was that the Department of Defense decided they wanted to put together this certification program. Again, good idea, right? Try to shore up the nation's cybersecurity footing. And do so in a way that borrowed CMMI versus ISO standards. So the way they did this was they decided they were going to be an accreditation body that would oversee this. Again, that makes sense. Okay, I like it. They then, however, made a critical mistake. They created a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, that officially formed the CMMC Accreditation Board, the CMMC-AB. And in that Memorandum of Understanding, the Department of Defense and the CMMC-AB injected self-canceling requirements. In legal terms, this is called an impossible contract. And what they did was they said that the CMMC-AB was going to oversee the accreditation of the eventual certification bodies, who are known as C3PAOs in the CMMC world, right? And at the same time comply with ISO 17011. ISO 17011 is the standard that governs how accreditation bodies like the AB are supposed to work, so that makes sense. The MOU then said, however, that the CMMC-AB will also certify people. This is where the problem comes in. An accreditation body does not offer certification. An accreditation body sits above certification bodies. So a certification body goes in and audits a company and issues a certificate. For that certificate to be valid, the certification body, in this case the C3PO, has to be accredited by a higher authority, given a license, if you will. And that license is called accreditation. Well, the accreditation body can't also offer certification because that's a conflict of interest. They're now actually literally competing with the people they're accrediting. So they're disallowed from doing that. And one of the things they're specifically disallowed from doing is certifying people, personnel, right? And the MOU with the DoD specifically told the AB that they're going to do two things. They're going to comply with 17011, and then they're going to certify people, which is prohibited by 17011. And why is the certification of people prohibited? This is because if the accreditation body is auditing the C3PAO to make sure that they're issuing their certificates in a valid and non-fraudulent manner, that those audits are themselves trusted and without any kind of influence. But if the accreditation body can generate money by writing up a nonconformity on the C3PAO by saying your people are poorly trained, by the way, they can get training by buying our services and getting certified by us, that is a conflict of interest, and that injects what they call an insurmountable threat to impartiality, or a financial threat to impartiality. It also eventually leads to bribery and fraud. So it's not a good look. It's not something that the AB wants to do. But the AB signed this agreement with the DoD. They said, yeah, we'll do that. Well, that meant that the MOU was immediately ineffective and a broken document that was therefore unenforceable. But the MOU is not a contract, and the MOU specifically says it's not a contract, which is a clever bit of wording because if it went to court, it would still be the thing that the lawyers held up as evidence, and it would be scrutinized, right? But the fact is that the second they signed it, it was defective and meaningless. But whatever happened, they went ahead and they formed the AB. Now the next problem that happened, or actually it was the first problem, but don't worry about the sequence, was that the AB was headed up by someone who was directly connected with the Department of Defense's point person on the CMMC program. So the Department of Defense put in Katie Arrington to head this up, and the head of the CMMC-AB happened to be Arrington's old boss at Dispersive Technologies, a guy named Ty Schreiber. Now, at the same time, Katie Arrington has insisted that the Defense Industrial Base, or the DIB, is comprised of over 300,000 companies. And yet, we are supposed to believe that just purely coincidentally, her former boss and a guy who donated money to her congressional campaign wound up being the head of the accreditation board that she just formed. So, I don't know. That's what we're supposed to be believed, that it's just such a small world that 300,000 companies and all the employees in those 300,000 companies is such a small world that this coincidence happened just organically. But that was a problem because it gave a black eye immediately to the AB. It looked bad. And under federal government rules, if something gives the appearance of a conflict of interest, it must be equally avoided as if it were a conflict of interest, right? And so Katie Arrington entered into this thing that looked specifically or suspiciously like a conflict of interest and signed off on it anyway. The other problem that happened is that it's not clear if Katie Arrington came up with this or Ellen Lord, but one of them decided that they were going to tackle what they've identified as one of the number one threats to U.S. national security, meaning a cybersecurity lapse. They were going to tackle this using the department within the federal government that has one of the largest budgets of any department on the planet. The Department of Defense has one of the largest budgets of anything on the planet. And they were going to decide to tackle this critical issue by not funding it. The funding was going to be zero. This was going to be free for the Department of Defense, which basically makes it an unfunded mandate and a de facto tax on the DIB companies, but I'll let you guys decide on that point. But by coming back now and saying that the AB would be wholly unfunded, this forced the AB, which was already formed in a suspicious manner, to resort to things that it probably shouldn't have. And that was the primary thing was, how do we fund ourselves? How do we get money? So they got really, really aggressive in their marketing, their website campaign, and all of these certification programs, right, for personnel before they actually really started rolling on these other things that they were tasked to do, right? We still don't have an assessment guide on how CMMC audits are supposed to be generated, for example. That was supposed to be out this month, and it's still not out. But we have lots of certification programs for people where people can send money to the AB and get certified. Now, I think that's a problem. So now, as of this week, the AB has just rolled out official certification programs for various things called registered practitioner organizations, RPOs, essentially certifying consultants and individuals who want to have the CMMC AB badge on their website and go out and generate money. And some of these, I believe, cost as much as $5,000 a pop. So they've generated quite a bit of money in this. Now that is prohibited by ISO 17011. So there's no way that the AB can comply with its obligations under this MOU and claim compliance with 17011 since they're certifying people. And again, what conflict of interest does that inject? Now, if the CMMC AB is going to be deciding which companies become the official certification bodies, the official C3POs, they're going to have to go around and audit those companies. Now we will not know if those decisions are based on whether or not that company has people who bought the RP, whether they've used an RPO consultant, whether they've spent additional money on other license programs with the AB or not, because there's been a financial threat to impartiality injected unnecessarily, right, into this relationship. So if you have two companies, Company A and Company B, they both want to be C3PAOs. They both apply to the accreditation body. But Company A has bought some certifications, and they've got people on staff who have RP and all sorts of other certifications from the CMMC AB. Company B does not. They have nothing. Now we can't know for sure when the AB steps in and decides, oh, we're going to accredit A but not B. We can't know if that decision was made based on a financial threat to impartiality, right? So what the AB will have to do is basically accredit everyone, which is not good because you can have C3PAOs, which are terrible, and they do poor audits, and they wind up giving CMMC certifications to companies that don't deserve them. This whole scheme relies on the ability for these companies to deny certification or for the AB to deny accreditation when companies don't deserve them. But now you've injected this financial interest in here that can't be resolved, which is why the accreditation standards say, don't do it. Don't do it. Disallow it entirely. Now, we have history behind this to support it. The ISO accreditation body called ANAB, the ANSI National Accreditation Board, exists specifically because its former company called RAB was forcibly split into two because of the same conflict of interest. They would accredit certification bodies, and then they would also license and certify and register the auditors. So they could go into a certification body and say, your auditors are poorly trained, you can solve that by buying our services over here. The world rejected that, and ANAB was forcibly split into two organizations. And now you have ANAB and a company called Exemplar. It was not only sold, it was moved to Australia. The Australians took it over. And now that's called Exemplar. Now more recently, A2LA, another famous accreditation body, got into the same hot water. They announced that they were forming a training and certification body called A2LA Workplace Training. They announced it in an official press release saying it was an A2LA company, had the same A2LA logo, same staff, same office, everything, and they got caught. And now they're forcibly being split into two. They formed a separate company, but it's still under scrutiny because they're still sharing the same staff, the same office and everything, even though they're insisting they're not. But anyway, that'll have to be further split over time, all right? And I believe they'll do it eventually, but they're not going happy. They're going kicking and screaming. They're not happy about it. So we have these history. The ANAB thing happened in 2005. The A2LA thing happened in 2019 and 2020. We have this history of this being a problem and companies being split. But for some reason, the CMMCAB insists that it's cracked the case. It's going to be able to do all these things and still be compliant. And the answer is no, it cannot, because we cannot be able to trust the decisions made by the AB when there's potential for them to go into these companies and write nonconformities, which are, conveniently fixed if they buy extra stuff from the AB. So they have to split themselves up. So then the next thing to think about is, okay, fine. We've made an argument. We said that the DoD bungled by trying to fuse together the CMMI concept with ISO concepts. The two don't speak to each other. They created a defective MOU that calls out requirements that can't be satisfied. The AB has been formed around some potentially weird conflicts of interest that it just seems to be incapable of resolving, and it's making matters worse. But in its defense, it needs to fund itself somehow because the DoD's not doing it. So they're trying to figure that out. And everyone's trying to figure this out. But the problem is that these deadlines are coming, right? And DIB companies are going to be forced to pay for this, only to find out later that either the CMMCAB is disbanded, it's sued, it faces, it could face class action lawsuits. It could face a challenge from somebody else who comes in and says this no bid contract that they're going to be awarded it's going to be contested, absolutely contested. There's a host of problems, and companies are going to be spending money on these CMMC certifications that may wind up being tossed out in a couple of years for whatever else is going to happen. Oh, and by the way, we had an election, so nobody knows really what's going to happen. But there's a fix that the CMMCAB could do right now, and now I want to be clear on something. Okay, I've had some board members recently from the CMMC AB attack me personally, which is just absolutely bizarre because I've been defending them up until this point, right? And these people don't seem to understand the history of what's going on behind the scenes. Back in September, I wrote a white paper detailing exactly what the AB needs to do, all right, to bring themselves into compliance with both their MOU and 17,011 in a way where they don't have to go back and draft a new MOU or get a new statement of work or anything. These are things they could do to fix it, and I provided that to them. I also provided it to Kevin Fahey over at the Department of Defense, who heads up this program under Ellen Lord. I provided it to Lord as well, and to Katie Arrington. Eventually, I was contacted by the AB. And the AB contacted me and said they wanted to put together a plan to try to fix this. Now, it wasn't going to happen overnight. There was going to be a transition period of about 6 months or so where initially there might be some remaining conflicts of interest, but eventually be purged. And I provided detailed documentation and a roadmap plan to the AB board itself, right, on how they can do these things. And I worked on, all of this was pro bono work. They offered to pay me. And I said, no, let me just do it pro bono. And I did. And I provided this free consulting work for them on how they can fix this problem. Now, however, some of the AB board members are either pretending that didn't happen or they weren't in the meetings, and they're saying that, they're attacking me saying that you should be providing solutions, not knowing that there's this whole 2-3 month period that's heavily documented, and I have receipts, okay, showing how I've been detailing them how they can do this, all right? So what I'm about to say is not news to them. It might be news to you, and it doesn't even sound even that particularly difficult. But the fact that they have chosen to ignore that, and that's their right. They didn't have to take my advice. There was never anything binding about it. But the fact that they didn't does give me the right to complain and say, I warned you guys you were in noncompliance, and now you remain in non-compliance. So what was the solution? Or what is the solution? The solution is simple. The CMMC-AB, if it intends to be an accreditation body, which is in the name of the organization itself, then it needs to comply with ISO 17011, and that means divesting all of its training and certification programs of people. The only thing it can do is go in and accredit C3PAOs. It needs to make sure that those organizations comply with its own rules and then another standard called ISO 17021. Right? It then needs to farm out and throw out the training and certification programs to other providers. Now, it can still charge a licensing fee and make a little bit of money. There's some licensing that's fully legal and not unethical, right, that it can do. But it basically removes itself from the decision-making process in any kind of personnel certification. So now when it goes in and audits a company, or when a C3PO goes in and audits a company, there's no conflict of interest because the company may have paid for certification, but if they did, somebody else got paid, right? That's all they needed to do, right? And again, I presented a roadmap on how they can do that in a gradual way. And even offered some, they came back and they said, yeah, but we really like some of these programs, like the RP, they really don't want to. And I gave them some advice on, okay, I don't like it, I think it's a bad idea, but there's ways that you can keep it without it being an overt conflict of interest, but there's certain things they'd have to do, as far as contracts and agreements and things. So I even met them sort of halfway on this, but they've elected to ignore it, they've elected to throw it out, and now they've elected to sort of start this campaign of attacks and harassment and everything, which we knew was coming, which is too bad. But from a DIB standpoint, this stuff matters because if CMMC certifications are granted to any company who applies, right, and anybody gets them, and there are no rules, and the CMMC-AB can maybe make a little bit of money on writing up a nonconformity and then saying, hey, if you want to fix it, you give us a little more money and we give you a certificate for something else, right? Then we can't trust it. And if the CMMC certifications cannot be trusted, there is no point. My estimation is that this is going to cost the DIB community $95 billion, okay? That is a $95 billion tax. We need to know that it's going to work. It has to be trusted. The audits have to be trusted without any conflicts of interest. Everything must be done with impartiality and objectivity. This is just the way these things are done, and it has to be that way. The way it stands right now, the AB has made a decision to put a stake in the ground and say, no, we are going to do all of these things and collect money on all of it, and they cannot. They simply can't, and they won't. The AB, as it exists now, will not exist in maybe 6 months to 12 months from now because it cannot survive this conflict of interest. And so all the people now saying that, they're very confident about it, they're not even going to be in those positions, just like all the AB board members who were already quit, and they were insisting before that they were right, and now they're not even members anymore. So the future is going to be very, very different. So whatever you as DIB community members can do to try to communicate to the AB and say, you really need to divest these conflicts of interest. We want you to succeed. We want to trust you. We want the CMMC program to succeed. We need it to succeed as a national defense factor, but you've got to do this. So whatever you can do, you should do. Communicate with the CMMC-AB. They claim to be open to communication. Communicate to the DoD PMO and to Katie Arrington. And maybe we can bring this thing back onto the rails before we get a full launch. And again, this is for national security, so this stuff kind of matters. Thanks a lot.